Welcome, everyone. My name is Ramses Out. I run roamstack.com, which will soon be rebranded to ThinkStack Club. And the reason why I'm rebranding is not because I don't like Roam anymore. I love Roam, but I've discovered that we need more tools. We need to focus more on workflows. And the workflow I am mostly interested in, and I find myself talking about the most, is learning how to learn. So there are many ways of working. There are many ways of acquiring skills. There are many ways to combine those two. So learning from your work. In this case, we're really going to focus on deconstructing a skill, finding the subskills, planning time, and really doing deliberate practice. So today we're going to talk about mostly the concept of ultra learning. So very short, intense learning projects that you can finish within a month. So that is basically the goal. Pick one skill you want to learn, spend at least 20 hours on it. So as you can see here in the outline, I also refer to the book, The First 20 Hours, which is by Josh Kaufman. And it's basically about pushing through the most annoying and frustrating bits of a skill to reach a level from where you can decide, okay, I'm going to continue, so really master this skill, or just maintain my current level and use whatever I've learned. So 20 hours, very reasonable. Most cohort-based courses ask you to invest way more. We're going to look at, instead of doing courses, really deciding, okay, what do I want to be able to do and how do I get there? So a lot to discuss today. First, we'll dive into why plan your learning projects. Then we'll have a quick look at what we can draw from Ultralearning and the First 20 Hours. And then basically the rest of the session are prompts to help you scope a learning project, choose learning materials, schedule your learning sessions or your learning activities. And then, which is outside of the scope, but which I will discuss in a next session, is executing and reflecting on your plan. So basically the day-to-day activities will be outside of the scope of this session, but I want you to already think about it. So designing a learning project for me is something I discovered quite recently, because I would say maybe 2-3 years ago, because before I was always learning skills very, very haphazardly. I would just try out stuff, which is fine. Like I still learn Spanish to fluency. I learned to program enough R to land a new job, but it was always very unstructured. So once I discovered Ultralearning and really, so the book Ultralearning, I have it here. So if you're interested, definitely I recommend you checking this one out. It's by Scott Young. Is to have a very short, intense projects where you're very directed, working toward a goal. So why plan your learning projects? And I will make this a little bit bigger. So the first reason, and this is a lot of text, take the time later to go through all these notes. I will basically just focus on the bullet parts. But first, learning is hard. So figuring out what you want to learn and then actually learn it, sit down. It's very easy to get distracted. So you need to be very deliberate about learning. So if you don't make time for it, it's not very likely that you are going to learn. When you do reserve time, you start to subconsciously prioritize learning that skill. So you're actually putting it first. So if you plan time, if you put time in your agenda, that is really a forcing function. And when you plan learning a skill, so you actually go through the framework that I'm teaching today, you can cut out a lot of the fluff. So by talking to experts, by trying to spot patterns of foundational skills, that is basically how you can find the 20% that will give you 80% of the results. And once you have 80% of the results, like having a good enough level is very easy to reach. And then finally, planning a learning project, you can do that by just spending 20 hours. And planning a project that will cost 20 hours to complete is very doable. But at the same time, 20 hours is not a lot. So you do need to think a little bit about, okay, how am I actually going to spend these 20 hours? So that is what we'll be discussing today. All right. If you have questions or anything, please interrupt me. And before we go into the nitty-gritty details, I want to know, please put it in the chat, who has already read either Ultralearning or The First 20 Hours. So I have this one only on my Kindle, but I'm curious if anyone okay, I see Alex has read Ultralearning. Alex, have you, and please put it in the chat, have you also applied some of the principles or not yet? Right, some. So that's good, because basically Ultralearning, the book, discusses different principles. So principles like meta learning, learning about to learn, but also focus, drills. You don't need every principle for every skill. In this talk, we'll be talking about basically some of the principles that will help you decide what you will be learning. So those are like the meta learning skills that we're talking about. Brian and Mohammed, I see that you are planning to getting the books. I also have, at least for Ultralearning, I have study questions or reading questions. So please reach out to me if you want those. But let's get started with a definition. So Ultralearning, it's a term coined by Scott Young. He is famous from the MIT challenge. So basically, he condensed a 4-year MIT degree, computer science degree, into 1 year. So he was really good at learning fast, acing his exams, and then became a programmer. So he's now programming. He also did a language learning project, documented it. So I think he learned 4 languages in 1 year. So spending 3 months, a 3-month learning project on each. And what it is, it's self-study. So it's self-directed. It's not going to a classroom. It's not some immersion. So he didn't go to a language school to immerse himself for 40 hours a week. That's not Ultralearning. Ultralearning is self-directed, and it's very aggressive. You start by basically applying the different principles that Scott teaches you, like drills. Let's see. Focus. Well, I think I have them here, so why try to draw them from memory? Yeah, so the principles are focus, drill, retrieval, feedback, retention, intuition, and experimentation. So he has 9 principles that he focuses on. And those principles, once you start to apply them, you start to notice that you can basically apply them to any skill that you want to learn. And the Ultralearning approach is not to become some master in a skill. It's not meant to become a master programmer. Again, this is to focus on very short learning projects, preferably 20 hours. That is basically a good amount of hours to get started with. Why Ultralearn? These are some reasons from the article, How to Start Your Own Ultralearning Project. I will link to it in the chat. Part 1 and 2, both, I really recommend reading them. But in part 1, it explains 4 reasons to do Ultralearning. So basically, it's to increase your focus, eliminate distractions, put the hardest parts first. So basically, any skill, the beginning is always the most difficult. And by becoming very intense, that is how you can push through all those frustrations. Ultralearning really focuses on deliberate practice. So focusing on your weaknesses instead of repeatedly only practicing your strengths. And it's all based on concrete blocks of time. So you don't really leave things to chance. You plan ahead. Again, Ultralearning helps to push through frustrating parts and is very results driven. And that makes it more interesting. So what happens often in classes, I taught Spanish classes for several years, so I've definitely been guilty of this. But what is taught in classes is often removed from reality. So you're basically just doing drills for the sake of doing drills instead of actually creating something that's useful. And even if, for example, you take a programming class and you build a personal website, maybe you're not interested in building a personal website. Maybe you want to create your own note-taking app, which is actually a project that Josh Kaufman did in 20 hours. So you need to find something that you really want to solve. So you need to find a problem that you want to solve for yourself and that you want to learn everything that's needed to solve that problem. And often you need to spend less time learning to actually solve a problem, whereas like often teachers tell you, well, it takes dozens and dozens of hours to master this skill, or maybe even hundreds. But again, we're not talking about mastery. We're talking about good enough. And that is what it makes it interesting. And then finally, ultra learning is a skill. So if you're very intense, if you follow these principles, you can start applying them time and time again to different skills. So also in the first 20 hours, there is an example of Josh learning yoga, him learning programming, touch typing, some other skills that basically he didn't master, but like he achieved a proficient level in 20 hours. So that is ultra learning. Why it takes the first 20 hours to that. Again, you have more principles to decide what your wanted outcomes. I feel like ultra learning leaves a little bit that in the middle. The first 20 hours also offers an approach to deconstruct any skill and learn it in logical order. So what the ultra learning says is basically talk to experts, and that is how you will deconstruct a skill. In previous sessions, I've talked about this, also very useful, but again, often it relies on expert people or successful learners to tell you what you should be learning. In the first 20 hours, Josh really deconstructs and tells basically how you Google stuff, how you just try out stuff, and then that way you can deconstruct the skill. And he gives, I think, 6 examples of learning projects he did within 20 hours and the results he had. So very useful to combine those 2 books. And again, I'm honest, I draw heavily from both in this session. So anything unclear about ultra learning? Like maybe you have some questions about, well, 20 hours, how long should it be? Or what does a day look like? Anything, put it in the chat. And then in the meanwhile, we'll just continue with how to scope a learning project. So this is quite a big part. I will run through this again. Get the book, read these notes, because this is basically how you can deconstruct an entire skill and find the scope of your learning project. So the first principle is choose a lovable project. So you really need to want to learn a skill. Doing ultra learning is not going to work if you're not interested in learning the skill. If you have to learn it, you're never going to put in the intensity that is necessary. It will drag along. Like you will maybe do 20 minutes a day, half an hour, which is not enough for ultra learning. For ultra learning, at least you would need 90 minutes a day, and I will get to that. But the key word is intense. So every day you have to spend time on it. Intense, no distractions. So it's the more excited you are about something, the more you will want to invest in learning that skill, and the faster you will learn. It sounds very common, like common knowledge or common sense, but I've spoken to way too many people who think they should learn something, but they're not really enthusiastic about it. So very important principle. Another very important principle also in ultra learning, in the first 20 hours, it's choosing one skill at a time. If you try to spread out your attention, switching between different learning projects, it's going to slow you down. There's something to say for interleaving, if you're familiar with the term or the concept of interleaving. Of course, there's something to be said about it, but it has to be related. So working on completely different skills, it's going to slow you down. And like it's like when you say, well, I'm not only going to learn one skill at a time, it can feel like I'm never going to learn other skills, but it doesn't mean you will never learn those other skills. You're just intently and very intensely focused on just one skill at this time. And to really make this easier on yourself, have some kind of someday maybe list or to learn list where you can just park things as you are working on a learning project and you maybe identify another skill that you would need to work on. Don't switch. Finish your learning project, put that other skill in your to learn list, someday maybe list, and return to it once you reflect on how your learning project went. And when you decide, okay, this is the next skill I'm going to learn. All right. So another important, like I would say this is basically where many people go wrong, is defining your target performance level. Again, people take a course without really thinking about, okay, what do I want to reach? What do I want to be able to do? And that is very important. As Charles Kettering said, a problem well stated is a problem well solved. Or I think he said half solved. Now that I think of it, I need to look it up. So ask yourself, what does good enough look like? Or how well must you be able to perform your desired skill? Again, doesn't have to be perfect. Maybe you just want to edit a video. Like I record these live sessions. I wanted to learn how to edit videos. I started with a course on Final Cut Pro, only to find myself like dozens of hours in and not being able to do what I wanted to do. Then someone recommended ScreenFlow. It's way simpler, lower, less steep learning curve. And I was basically editing videos within an hour. So instead of spending 20 hours learning all this difficult stuff, I could have just spent 1 hour. So what does good enough look like? Maybe it doesn't even deserve a full learning project. And how you write that down is just a single sentence description, again, of what you want to be able to do. Visualizing your wanted outcome can really help you define. So just picture yourself doing the skill that you want to be able to do. Could be, I don't know, improve your golf swing, could be designing websites. Just try to visualize for yourself what you want to be able to do. Another example from my own life is I visualized what I wanted my personal website to look like. And I thought, oh, I will need to do different HTML, CSS courses to be able to build my own theme. Once I actually just started to figure out, oh, this is what I like, and I started to inspect a little bit the HTML. Granted, I already had a little bit of HTML knowledge, so I knew how to inspect, for example, the source code. And I very precisely just started to look at examples of things that I liked, so websites that I like. I could basically just steal from those websites, reassemble the pieces, and as I was reassembling the pieces, I had my website. So I learned, I always say, basic HTML, CSS in a weekend, because I just had this very clear vision of what I wanted to achieve. And then basically all the knowledge that I needed unfolded itself as I was working through problems. Again, I had some experts that I had access to. I could ask some friends of mine who were already proficient in HTML, CSS to ask very specific questions. But as I was forming my questions, I was learning. I tried to understand all the code that they gave me. And that was good enough for me. So define your target performance. Then deconstruct the skill into subskills. I will not spend too much time on this. If you are a RoamStack member, look at how to choose your next skill. So that is basically where I discuss the DIS framework by Tim Ferriss. And by deconstructing a skill, you reduce overwhelm, because when you think, for example, I want to learn web design, well, it's so big. What do you actually want to build? Like, what do you need to learn first? Is it a personal website? What kind of personal website is it? Is it just a portfolio website with some links? Do you need to add some images? So by cutting out everything that is not necessary at the moment and only focusing on what you do need to be able to do, you reduce overwhelm. Then try to break it down in the smallest possible parts. Again, expert interviews or talking to successful learners or experts can help here. That can also help you find the foundational subskills. If you don't have access to those experts, try to basically Google for best way to learn X, and X being the skill. So best way to learn JavaScript to build portfolio websites. So become as specific as possible, read different articles, read forums, and distill the 20% of stuff that you see repeated most. So if you really want to break it down, and I will take the example of programming, understand concepts like variables, loops, conditional statements. Those are basically the subskills. So if you can write a loop, that opens up a little box of possibilities for you to apply. If you learn conditionals, another realm of possibility opens up. So those are basically the subskills, and then obviously apply to your very specific use case, to your language that you are learning. So that for deconstruction, and I will, just to make it easier, I will link to the article that will help you. So this is the workshop, which is for members only. And let me see, I also, oh, this one is also for, but after the session, I will make this one, I will make it public because I have basically the walkthrough in it. Okay, we're halfway with this list. Obtain critical tools. Looking at the people here, I think most like tools. For example, Roam or Obsidian, Readwise, we all like these different tools. We don't need all tools. Like sometimes or often tools are just a distraction, but most skills do need specific tools. Like if you're going to play tennis or golf, you need like a golf club or a tennis racket. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to practice your skill. So ask yourself, what tools, component, and environment do I need to have access to before I can practice effectively? So, or efficiently. So yeah, efficiently is actually way more important than effectively, because you want to have quick feedback loops. And that is very important, because if you need to borrow stuff, or you want to tennis, but you don't have access to a tennis court, how are you actually going to practice? So this is where you run into potential limitations, and you take them out before you even start learning. There's nothing as detrimental to your practice time as discovering that you don't have the tools. It's also very frustrating. It can throw off completely from your learning project. So very important principle. Similar, eliminate barriers to practice. So again, what equipment or environment is limiting for you can also be time. Maybe you just don't have time. Maybe you want to learn a skill, but you only have time in the evenings and you're just exhausted after your day job. So maybe time is a limiting factor. And as Scott Young says, often it's not really time that's the problem, it's attention. So not being able to focus when you actually have the time to focus can be a problem. Then I'm not going to too deeply into these, but potential barriers and how to solve them. For example, high pre-practice effort. One example, I wanted to learn kickboxing. I did kickboxing for several years. Before, I lived very far away from the gym, and I would skip practice quite a bit. Even like, especially in winter when it was cold, I had to go get on my bike. Once I switched to a gym 5 minutes from my house, basically the pre-practice time went way down. Like I didn't have to cycle for 20 minutes. And that little barrier, taking away that little barrier, that was enough for me to do that for years. Maybe you have limited resources, again, maybe tennis court or access to a golf course. Distractions, very sneaky. Notifications on your phone, on your computer. So I always recommend either dedicate a room if you can, or even corner of your room where nobody can disturb you. Invest in some good headphones, and also get some apps, or preferably a machine, a computer, if you're learning digital skills, where you will practice your skill without any distractions. If you don't need internet, unplug internet. Have some apps that block internet access. If you're really bad still, like you're addicted to checking your social media, get a machine where you don't even have a browser, if it's possible, with your skill. And finally, emotional blocks. I think for many people, these are like very big. It's not necessarily the tools that they are missing. It's often the emotional blocks, like fear, embarrassment, just procrastination, not feeling confident. My advice is always talk to fellow learners, express, like journal about what you feel, what you run into, how you could navigate challenges, share those journal entries with fellow learners, and just knowing that you are not alone can already be a huge help. All right, I'm going to speed up a little bit because we still have many prompts to go through, and I want to give you some time to write a little bit during this session. So the last 4 principles: make that a dedicated time for practice. Nobody finds time. You need to make time, and make sure that you block off good chunks of time. So not 10 minutes here and there. You're never going to switch in 10 minutes from one task to another task. For many people, it takes like 20 minutes to just switch tasks because of all the residue. There are some techniques like interstitial journaling. I will not go into that right now. That is for the next session. But for now, just focus on large, uninterrupted blocks of time, preferably 90 minutes or 2 hours. So basically deep work blocks. Again, where you're not distracted, all the notifications turned off, and your only focus is that learning session. Pre-commit to at least 20 hours. So that's an advice from the first 20 hours, because once you commit to those 20 hours, you will hit frustrations, a lot of frustrations in those first 20 hours, but it will be more likely that you push through if you already committed to it. You can make it even more of a forcing function to already plan all your learning sessions. And what Tim Ferriss recommends in his DISC framework is to also add stakes. So that's the last S. And basically, what are the negative consequences of you not fulfilling those 20 hours of deliberate practice? So he talks about anti-charities. So if you pick a charity that you are fully against. So for example, if you're against gun ownership, give money to, or reserve money for, the NRA. And there are some I think Stick is a service that you can actually basically escrow your money, and you give somebody else the key, and they have to tell, okay, this person has achieved their learning project, or they haven't. So that can be a forcing function as well. Just telling people that you're doing something and that you've dedicated time, that can also work as a forcing function. Feedback, super important. Fast feedback is crucial. So the faster or the shorter your feedback loops, the easier you can apply that feedback to your own actions. So feedback is basically just information about how well are you doing in performing this skill. So are you doing it correctly? Are you not doing it correctly? Computer programming is an example where you have very short feedback loops because you have the console that gives you error messages. If your skill needs to be observed from the outside, again, golf swing or tennis swing, backhand, whatever, often those people, like athletes, they have coaches. And why do they have coaches? Because a coach can see, okay, you're doing this wrong, and they can tell you this is how you should do it. So again, very short feedback loops, not possible for everyone. Coaches tend to be expensive. Maybe you can film yourself. What many language learners do is they speak and they record, and then they just post it on language learning forums, and they ask, critique my pronunciation, tell me where I'm pronouncing words wrong. So that is another way to get like reasonably fast feedback, although obviously you need to wait for people to respond. Another way, again, for language learning would be a technique they call shadowing. So basically you just copy the person as you're speaking, and then you can listen back and see, okay, how well do I match the pronunciation? Again, shadowing in itself is a skill, so it requires practice. But yeah. And then some forcing functions, again, practice by the clock in short bursts. So basically set Pomodoro timers, reserve time. And for each practice session or each study session, just set a timer. So even when you're distracted, even when you feel like not going, you have that timer to tell you when it's time to stop. I know it sounds ridiculous, but people I know who use Pomodoro, it helps. And I've noticed it for myself as well. And then finally, for the perfectionist among us, focus on practicing as much as you can, as fast as you can, while keeping good enough form. So look for like 80 to 90% accuracy in your skill. Don't strive for perfection. And once you hit that, like that 80, 90% accuracy, then you can speed up your learning pace a little bit. So do try to find that balance. All right. So these are the principles basically to scope a learning project. So what we talked about is what types of projects to choose, how to cut out the noise, dedicate time, and practice as much as can, so as much as you can, while collecting as much feedback as you can. So part of it is obviously advice for as you are learning, but I believe that like really thinking about these principles before you start doing a learning project will really boost your confidence. Because if you say, well, I'm just going to spend 20 hours, I'm going to plan very specifically what I want to be able to do. So define your target performance level. It's super important. Like this, for me, is the key of these 10 principles. Once you have that, we can dig a little bit deeper. Questions about these principles, especially like I want to know from you which ones don't make sense to you. I guess they make sense to everyone. So again, all of these principles are from the first 20 hours. Josh Kaufman, get the book, because he basically runs through them throughout the book with the different learning projects he did. Now on to some writing prompts. I have created a template, and I realized I should have prepared it, drawing from Ultralearning. So in the last chapter of Ultralearning, there's basically a checklist, and it's called, I should look it up, your first Ultralearning project. And in it, Scott describes 5 steps to go from knowing or discovering what you want to learn all the way to deciding, okay, what am I going to do with like next? So I've done the learning project, now what? So really beginning to end. So step 1 is do your research. Step 2, schedule your time. Step 3, execute your plan. Step 4 is review your results. And then step 5, choose to maintain or master what you've learned. We're in this session going to focus basically on choosing the materials or do your research and scheduling your time. These are all writing prompts. I've distilled them from the book. Scott didn't write them down as writing prompts, but I like these, how do you say it? Basically algorithms of thought to think through these problems. And just give me just a second, because I need to copy the entire manual and put it into my graph. Oh, not this one. So again, I will put this in my public graph. Just bear with me. But I believe this is a super useful resource to get you started. I no idea why that happened, but anyway. All right. So again, the steps: do research, schedule time, execute your plan, review your results, choose to maintain or to master. And as you can see here, I have written these prompts down here. And by clicking on the references, and again, this is why I love Rome, you have a little manual. So if you want to have some additional information about, okay, how to answer these prompts, you have that here. So I'm going to link to this page, and I want to use some time. We have 20 minutes left, but I don't need to talk all the time. I just want you to think about, and we start with how to choose learning materials. And these are the prompts that I want you to think about. So answer them individually. Again, grab the template. So from here, copy it into your own Roam graph or Obsidian, Logseq, whatever you use. Obviously, if you don't use Roam, you will lose this this nifty block reference thing, manual. But let's think about these questions. And if you've attended previous sessions and you've done the writing exercises, you probably already have some sense of what you're going to learn. Maybe you've already started doing some research into like what subskills you need to learn or how other people have learned it. So if you have a skill in mind, I want you to think about, just write down, what topic am I going to learn and what is approximately the scope? So thinking of the scope, thinking of the most important thing, think of your target performance level. So what is the scope? So what does good enough look like? Have a single sentence description if you want to be what you want to be able to do. Visualize your wanted outcome. So that is basically what we're going to focus on first. Like, be clear about what you're going to learn and why you're going to learn it. Visualize. So that is the first prompt. And I will start the timer in just a little bit. If you already have done some research, have others successfully learned the skill or domain? If you don't know, if you haven't done this yet, think of forums you could check. Think of people you could ask. Maybe you already know some methods to approach your skill. And connected to that, maybe you already know some primary sources. So the books, video, tutorials, classes, or teachers. So again, think of specific people who you could check in with to see, okay, this is my desired outcome, and these people or resources I'm going to check out. And again, the more specific you are about what resources you're going to use, the better. And one example is do 3 exercises every day from the book Python Crash Course. So that is a very specific resource. So the book is Python Crash Course, and I do 3 exercises. That is the most basic unit of or definition of what you're going to learn. What direct practice activities will I use? This question comes from Ultralearning, but again, you can basically just fill in what is the learning project that you want what is the learning outcome that you want? So that will define your learning project. Actually, today I defined a new learning project for myself. I've been thinking about learning JavaScript, but I didn't have a use case yet. And I just realized that if you know Jamie Mills, he has also a Roam course. He also talks about learning how to learn. And what I love most about his community is that he is he has built his own community single-handedly. Like it looks great, it looks unique, it works really well. And I thought, for me, that is an example. I want to create my own community. Obviously, my community is focused on different things. I am less heavy focused on courses as he is. So my platform will be different, but I want to learn enough HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to be able to create something like that. And then maybe you have your primary materials, but always have some backup materials ready. So start with a narrow set, maybe 1-2 books, but have some backup materials ready. That can be, for example, just a forum that you have ready where you can ask your questions. Maybe you have found a thread with all these different learning materials. It's not, you don't need to already acquire those learning materials. As you start learning, you will often stumble upon maybe vague explanations in the learning materials, and you need to go out on the web to get a better understanding of some concepts or how to apply certain principles. So don't fret too much about this, but it can definitely help to have and save you time if you have some backup materials. I'm going to set a timer for 4 minutes. Also gives me some time to give my voice some rest. And I want you to think about these questions. Again, look at here, copy these into your graph and just answer them. And then after, post them in the chat. I would love to see some of your answers and maybe help you make them even more specific, if possible. Is anyone brave enough to share their their answers to these questions? Just copy paste. That would be the easiest way, because I'm always curious to see how fast people can come up with basically the scope, or sorry, the learning materials or the concepts that they need to learn. So again, going back to how to choose learning material, the first 20 hours, and he talks. I dove most deeply into his programming example, and he basically just brainstorms what he already knows. So Josh Coven already took a programming course in college. He had forgotten most, but he still remembered stuff like variables, loops, programming languages, applications, programs. So he was basically just brainstorming things, and whatever was fuzzy for him, he would try to clarify. So he already had a little bit of a roadmap of the concepts that he needed to know. So that was already a starting point. But again, I'm very curious what you've written down. Okay, Alex, you say you want to learn Blender. You found the 4-week course. Have you already decided for yourself what you want to be able to create using Blender? So Blender in itself, it's as far as I know it, it's a visual or an animation program. Please correct me if I'm wrong. 3D design. Yeah. Have you already thought about like the specific 3D objects that you want to create, or like what is your wanted outcome? And to help you, I will quickly go to the first 20 hours. Let me see. I need to scroll a little bit, but yeah, Alex, my question for you is: have you considered what is your wanted outcome? So Blender as a skill, fine, but what is your wanted outcome? Okay. So Alex says, for the final project, it seems like creating an environment and importing a character. You can be more specific. So what does the environment look like? What does the character look like? That will really help you look at other examples. That will, maybe you want to create a forest. Again, I am not familiar with Blender in any way. Or maybe you want to create a city. Maybe you need completely different skills because one is organic shapes and the other one is more square shapes. So that will define like who you talk with, because maybe you know a Blender expert on Twitter, but they only create urban environments, whereas you maybe want to create a nature or natural environment. The characters, is it like a fantasy character, or is it more a human character? That can determine who you talk to. That can determine what tutorials you're going to follow. So to take my own example, and also from the book, The First 20 Hours, programming, like I can say, I want to learn programming. What do I want to program? What is my wanted outcome? So my wanted outcome is being able to create my own community platform. So C, C++, all those local languages are not interesting for me. I want to do web programming, which already shrinks like the skills that I need to learn, or the programming languages that I need to learn. And by really focusing on a specific use case, maybe I can use a framework. So maybe it's better to learn a framework than to start from scratch. Maybe there are some specific libraries I can look into. Same for Blender. Maybe Blender has some libraries that you could use. So maybe it pays to focus on a few libraries, because you say you want to have a like sci-fi city environment with cyberpunk type themes. Maybe there are already libraries for Blender that can help you with that. So, and I will not teach you too much more. But this is basically how you think about learning a skill, or just like deciding the scope of the skill. Like really be specific, like visualize for yourself the end product. And then from there on, you start to look for the right people, the right tutorials, the right courses. Because again, I did this Final Cut Pro course, which was basically aimed at people who want to really master the tool. I don't want to master any video editing tool. I just want to edit these videos, do a few simple operations like move my camera feed around on the screen, or cut out little snippets. I don't really need a big course for that. Maybe a tutorial is enough. So that's really how I want you to think about it. For sake of time, I am going to run through the other prompts, and I would like to ask you again, revisit the stuff from RoamStack. So how to choose a skill. And if you're basically interested in just learning how to learn, then the session from last week, let's see, deconstructing the meta skill of learning how to learn. Otherwise, just focus on this first one. So how to choose your next skill. But now, how to schedule learning activities. This is basically defining not the knowledge scope of your learning project, but the time scope. So ask yourself, how many weeks will my learning project take, and be realistic. So you can say, oh, I'm going to spend half a year learning this. Is that realistic? So again, start from your wanted outcome. I wanted to have a personal website. I spent 1 weekend on it, whereas I was thinking before, oh, I will need 2 months to learn HTML, Java, CSS. Like that was based on nothing, but I just told myself, oh, we'll have two months for this, because I have nothing else planned for the next 2 months, like apart from work. So be realistic. Keep your learning projects short. So between 4 weeks and 12 weeks, I would bias towards just 1 month. So 4 weeks, because the shorter, the less interruptions that are possible, also keeps you on your game, keeps it more intense because you have less time to procrastinate. And let's see, if you want to learn complex skills, so again, Blender, maybe just building an urban sci-fi environment takes you 20 hours. So it takes you 4 weeks basically to learn. Break up environment design with and character design. So create 2 separate learning projects for them. Maybe you want to add some animation, but you first need to just design the environments. Do that in another learning project. So break break the bigger skill, Blender in this case, doing 3D design, having an environment and a character, and whatever that happens in that environment with that character, break those things into smaller subskills and then focus on one at a time. Again, experts can help with this, forums can help with this, courses can help with this, because often in courses you will see different modules. What I personally find often with courses, they run through the modules way too quickly. So maybe you have 2 or 3 hours worth of videos in a module, fine, but then they give you 1 week to digest those concepts and to practice them. Whereas maybe one module is worth an entire separate learning project of a month. So think about that. Then, so you start from big, like have your entire learning project, thinking, okay, how long will I spend? Now you're actually going to test, is this reasonable? So week by week, you're going to see, what am I going, like what time or what days am I going to spend on learning deliberately? So not just some flashcards during lunch. No, you sit down 90 to 120 minute block and you focus. And again, nobody has time. You need to make time. And one thing that is very important, you can think, I only have like Saturdays or Sundays available. And I would just spend 8 hours every Saturday and Sunday on learning my skill. Very noble, but nobody is going to be able to do that. Like, you will burn out. So also keep like your mental health, your energy levels into consideration. Think about, and that is actually the next step, think about when during the day do you have time and the energy. So maybe you need to get up 1 or 2 hours earlier in the morning and go to bed a little bit earlier, because if you would study or practice after work, you're exhausted, whereas if you would do it before work, you have the mental clarity. Skills like programming, often because it's also a type of creative work. Writing helps very well to do it in the morning. So experiment a little bit. Again, talk to successful learners, to experts, how they learned it. And the goal is to make learning a habit. So you really need to make it almost automatically that you're going to spend time on this. Like I said, adapt your learning moments to the type of learning tasks, and think of specific days and then reserve time in your calendar, which is basically the last question. Look at your calendar, see what's ahead on a day. Also take into consideration, because planning a month ahead can be difficult, but for example, maybe on certain days you go to the office, or other days you work from home. So maybe you have like a little bit less stress, less phone calls, less meetings. Those are maybe the days where you can start a little bit earlier your day, practicing your skill. Or maybe those days are perfect. Maybe on Thursday you have no meetings, you have time for some deeper work. That leaves you more refreshed at the end of the Thursday. Just giving a random example. So think of those days. Oh yeah, very good comment by Lucas about basically finding what to learn. And he says, I find it also useful to find the most recommended book on a given topic and then check their table of contents on Amazon. Yes, I think that's an awesome approach. I would take it one step further. I would basically take the top 10, look at the table of contents, and then try to spot basically the 20% that you see mentioned most, because those are often the fundamental knowledge or skill blocks of that topic. So it's all about pattern recognition. You can say, well, I have this one expert and I will completely follow their advice. Fine, if you trust them. Often in my experience is listen to different experts and use the wisdom of the crowd. So maybe there's often overlap, especially with skills. There are fundamental concepts that you need to understand before you can basically progress onto intermediate or expert levels. But here we're just talking about getting just outside of the beginner level onto, well, applying this skill in real life. But very good recommendation. Next, so this is not today, and these are a lot of prompts. And again, I have written them down in this template. So if you, like, after this session, you think, okay, now I am going to pick a skill, dedicate some time to it. I have my resources ready. Now the question is, okay, as you are going, and this will be a next session, but maybe you can already start using these prompts. So these are reflection prompts. After basically every learning session or practice session, use a few of these prompts to basically direct your attention. Ask yourself things like, if you found yourself focused or unfocused, ask, when were you focused? And when did you start to multitask and get distracted? Maybe it was a notification, which again, for you is a signal to remove that barrier. Maybe you notice that you're skipping learning sessions or you're just procrastinating. Maybe your planned learning session isn't at the right time of the day or not on the right day. Although I do recommend you spending every day some time to learning a skill. If you don't, pick the right days, etc., etc. So for example, with drills, I urge you to look at your weakest points. It's often, often we look at, this went really well. Yes, I'm finally learning the skill, but then we're ignoring the weaker points. Very easy to do. Don't beat yourself up. Just identify them and make a plan to practice them deliberately. Maybe just find some friction in one specific step in a skill. So, etc., etc. Look at these questions. Again, for every question, I've written a little explanation. So use that. And let's see. Oh, I need to fix these, I see, but I will do that in a bit. Then review your results, but this is basically at the end of the learning project, which I will not dive into, but again, just some generic questions you can ask yourself. Additional resources, I will post these in the chat. So this is the first 20 hours. This is, I already posted that one. So how to start your own learning project. And then finally, I will post these again and the notes to the, let's see, oh, this one. All right. And we're over time, 7 minutes. That always happens. Sorry. So a lot of talking again from my side. Thank you, Alex, for putting in the chat and let me workshop it a little bit, dissect it a little bit more. Hopefully it was useful. If you have questions, don't hesitate to send me an email. support@romestack.com. Soon it will be thinkstack.club, but I will send a notification out. What else? So I'm planning to do the next session. I'm not sure if I will do it next week. If that's the case, I don't organize it next week. It will be the week after. Just keep an eye on the RoamStack newsletter where I announce all the sessions. If you want to revisit this recording, it should be up by Friday. And again, it will be in the RoamStack newsletter. Is there any questions? Comments, complaints, whatever, put it in the chat. I will stick around for just a little bit. For now, I just want to thank you. I'm going to stop the recording, but I will stick around for a little bit. For now, I just want to thank you and hope to see you next time.